I recently came across this quote from the late Dr. George Sheehan, and it so closely aligns with what I wanted to talk about tonight that I thought we'd start there. And it goes like this: live, if you will, a life without risk. Avoid the forge, the fire, the flame, but know that joy and happiness in the good life come only as unexpected interludes in the endless, stressful, tense, and restless journey to become the person you are. Now, it seems he's suggesting that to live a good life, one must accept stress. But I wonder if that's how most of us truly live. Do we really accept or embrace stress? See, I seem to think more often than not, we avoid it to the extent we can. Now, I think there are two important journeys in life. There's the one Dr. Sheehan suggests here that, and that's the journey to become who we are and understand the person we are at any given moment. And the second journey, I think, is the one to become a person we aspire to be. And stress, it turns out, plays an important role in both journeys. Now, over the last several years, running has provided me several such journeys. And I've been fortunate enough to finish a number of marathons and ultramarathons ranging up to 150 miles. And just last year, I even Forrest Gumped my way across the country, running the 3,100 miles in about 4.5 months. But I didn't start out a focused runner. Perhaps focused isn't the first adjective that you're thinking for someone who's run across the country. I'll let you insert your own. But either way, I have distinct memories of middle school track practices, swinging by the 7-Eleven to pick up candy and then come back and lay out on the infield working on our tan. Or high school cross-country practices where we definitely spent more than a little time jumping on backyard trampolines rather than, running. So the point is, I didn't start a focused runner, but I think I became one. And it's that process of becoming that I think is really important. Now, after high school, I really wanted to stay involved in sports in college. But given the amazing work ethic I just described, it probably comes as no surprise that I wasn't receiving a flood of scholarship offers. But the rowing program was one serious team on campus that was actively recruiting walk-ons, even athletes like me that had no previous experience in the sport. Now, they were looking for tall and strong athletes, and I was neither, but a number of the guys on the team emphasized that work and work ethic was really the most important part. That height and strength were an advantage in our sport, but ultimately medals were earned by those willing to work the hardest and smartest for them. And I soon found that ethic was truly embodied in the culture of this particular team. We were a club program, and without much university funding, we were left to mow lawns and rake leaves and move furniture to pay our coach's salary. We transported ourselves around the country for competitions. We bought and washed our own uniforms, and we slept on the floor of any organization that would have us to save on the cost of hotels. But we competed against the best collegiate rowing programs in the country. But we did it on a shoestring budget, facing a number of obstacles that our well-funded competitors most certainly did not. And the inequality of that situation certainly stung. And we worked every day, sometimes twice a day, to overcome the obstacles that we faced. If we were going to beat some of the most well-funded programs in the country, those with every advantage, those stacked with the best high school recruits the country had to offer, we were going to have to outwork them because they definitely had a head start on us and the deck was stacked in their favor. I think it was these few years rowing in college that I really fell in love with the process of dreaming big, embodying stress, and becoming something bigger than we were. Now, stress works on a number of levels. Stress and adaptation work for individuals and populations in the short term and in the long term. Over the short term, individuals adapt to immediate environmental stresses through a process called acclimation. Now, an example of acclimation, if we were to leave the auditorium tonight and step out into the cool night air, but without our jackets, the blood vessels near our skin would immediately constrict as an adaptation to conserve body heat. Over the longer term, individuals adapt to chronic stresses through a process called acclimatization. And this is perhaps the process of adaptation that most of us are the most familiar with. The more weights we lift, the stronger our muscles become, capable of lifting even more weights. The more violin we play, the more we strengthen the neuromuscular connections between our brain and our fingers that enables us to become better players. The more we experience stressful environments, the better our bodies become at tolerating those stressful environments. And over the course of generations, populations adapt to ongoing stresses, consistent stresses in their environment through evolution by natural selection. Now, all three processes of stress and adaptation are universal to all life on Earth and go back over 3 billion years to the origins of life itself. In fact, biologists think that the ability to adapt to one's external environment is a pretty important part of what it means to be alive at all. Now, I can only imagine the stresses that Phidippides, the legendary Greek runner, must have experienced. Herodotus writes that over 2,500 years ago, Phidippides left Athens en route to Sparta, a distance of over 150 miles, and that he completed that journey in under 36 hours. Now, if we think of that, that's an average of 14-minute miles in a world without asphalt roads, GPS, Cliff Bars, Gatorade, hydration pack. The man didn't even have a flashlight, right? I have to believe that there were very few people at that time capable of such a feat. But today, over 300 runners from around the world travel to Athens in late September every year to test themselves against this historical standard. And every year, about half make it to the finish. Now, a few years ago, I was one of these 300, and I stood on that starting line super eager to test my understanding of stress and adaptation and to test whether the person I had become was up to that challenge. Now, there are stresses that are relatively easy to anticipate and prepare for. The distance to be covered, the temperature likely to be experienced, a hydration and electrolyte strategy necessary for success. Those were all relatively easy variables to prepare for, perhaps emphasis on relatively easy. But then there are variables that are very difficult to prepare for. It was difficult to anticipate and prepare for how my body would respond to the foods made available to the athletes immediately before and during the race. It was difficult to anticipate how I would sleep in the nights leading up to the race and how that might compound other stresses I experienced on race day. And then there are those variables, those stresses that are nearly impossible to anticipate, let alone prepare for. And so it was one of those that I experienced just 10 miles into the race. It was nearly impossible for me to anticipate the shock of discovering a dead body crushed under the weight of a collapsed building. That definitely fell into the category of unknown unknowns, and it left me a little shell-shocked for more than a few miles. And that day, my race ended just 60 miles outside of Athens, well short of halfway. You know, I had faced a stressful and admittedly joyful journey to become the kind of person I hoped would make it all the way to Sparta. But on that weekend, on the 2,500th anniversary of Phidippides' original run, and the weekend of my 30th birthday, I wasn't that person. Not yet. 4 years later, I returned on the 2,504th anniversary of Phidippides' original run, and the weekend of my 34th birthday, admittedly far less symbolic, but I returned stronger and wiser and was able to make it the full 153 miles in around 32 and a half hours. And the one thing I learned from that experience was that failure is always temporary. Now, some opportunities may come and go. I could never get back that weekend that was my 30th birthday and the 2,500th anniversary of Phidippides' original run. I would never see that opportunity again. But we always have the opportunity to grow and exceed our previous limitations. As big a dream as this was, to make it to Sparta, you would think in the months and weeks leading up to the event, I would have had a single-minded focus. And I did-ish, but I'm as easily distracted by shiny things and squirrels as anyone. And on the road to fulfilling this dream, I was infected with the idea of running across the United States. So why run across the United States? Why run Spartathlon? Why run any of these really, really, really long races? And I think for me, it provides a window unlike any other to understand who I am and also transform myself into the more compassionate, patient, and resilient person I aspire to be. There's a moment in nearly every distance race where I'm confronted with my true self. Not the guy I see in the mirror who may think he deserves success because, gosh, he worked really hard, or even the guy whose grandmother thinks he's a real catch, right? But instead, I'm confronted with the guy stripped of that overconfidence and that affirmation. And I think, in retrospect, it's a truly beautiful moment when we're overwhelmed by stress. Again, perhaps emphasis on in retrospect. But in that moment, if we can breathe and reflect, I think we have an opportunity to very consciously choose the direction toward our future selves. In that moment, are we going to quit or are we going to suck it up? Are we going to complain about our situation or adapt to it? Are we going to feel self-righteous at the finish line? Or are we going to feel compassionate for those that weren't quite able to make it or who are still out struggling? The more I think the more we choose option A or B, the more we become A or B. And I knew in the race across USA, I would experience many such moments of stress, hopefully some overwhelming, but more than a few moments of stress and more than a few opportunities for growth. And so on January 16th, 2015, we set out. There were 12 runners, 3 loving and tireless volunteers, and 2 amazingly organized and patient race directors. And we left Huntington Beach, California, en route to Washington, D.C. and the Chesapeake Bay beyond. We experienced so many adventures along the way. Moments of stress and joy, self-reflection and growth. I can really only scratch the surface tonight, but I'd love to share with you a few of the lessons I learned along the way. First, stress can be positive and transformative even when taken on unwillingly. Without stress, there is no challenge, no growth, no adaptation. Remember, adaptation and growth are part of what it is to be alive. And so to the extent that stress facilitates growth, I think it has to be a good. Second, perception is malleable, and we have much more control over it than we think. My experience on any given day of the run seemed much more closely aligned with my state of mind than the physical reality of my environment. A 20+ mile an hour headwind into a freezing rain could be a fun challenge, or it could really suck, right? Beautifully clear skies could be awe-inspiring or bring nothing but oppressive heat. And so if my environment could be interpreted as either positive or negative, I figured, why not spin it positive? And from that day forward, I became my own spin doctor. And perhaps unsurprising to everyone, it turns out it's much more fun on the bright side of life. Third, we absorb the energy that surrounds us. We're social animals. We can't help it. There will always be people that think we're not fill in the blank enough to achieve our dreams. But they don't share our vision. But they might be right. But we still have to try. And their negative energy and pessimism isn't going to help us achieve our dreams. Instead, if we look around, we see that the world is filled to the brim with inspiring stories. And if we choose to bring those people in and wrap ourselves in their inspiring and positive energy, I think we'll find ourselves creating more of those inspiring stories of our own. Fourth, milkshakes. Hats off to the food scientists and engineers that have developed this nectar of the gods. I can't begin to estimate how many milkshakes fueled our race across the United States, but it was certainly a significant number. Which brings me to my next thought, which is we should really take all things in moderation, including moderation. How are we ever to know ourselves if we're forever unwilling to step up to and over the edge of what's safe and smart and reasonable? If we're forever unwilling to approach that edge, if we're committed to the moderate track, I think we're destined to remain moderate people. And I think that's just a huge waste of talent and potential. Because moderate people don't do amazing things, and moderate people don't inspire the world. And I think we could all use a little more of that. Finally, in the world of things worth our attention, variables we can't control shouldn't rank very high. And yet every time we flip on the television, we're confronted with talking heads that seem to spend much more time criticizing the decisions and doings of others than in doing themselves. And we all know friends and family and neighbors and coworkers who think the experiences of celebrities are much more interesting and exciting than going out and creating their own experiences. You know, I find the more time I spend fixated on the decisions and doings of others, on events that have no bearing on my life, or complaining about my present situation, the less time I have to adapt to it. And to the extent that adaptation and growth are part of what it means to be alive, I think they're all distractions from truly living. So let me finish with these thoughts. You know, life is a journey where we're born, we do stuff, and eventually we die. And who we are on our deathbeds is a product of what we've done. The experiences we've had, the relationships we've nourished, the stresses we've embodied, and the growth that we've enjoyed from them. I think it's obvious that no one is born able to run 150 miles, or run a Fortune 500 company, or fly a rocket to the moon, or even raise terrific kids. Now, we dream all these things and we become all these things, or I should say we become people capable of these things through the process of embodying stress and growth. And so I would encourage you to take the next step towards understanding the person you are and becoming the person you aspire to be, to embrace that stressful journey and all the joy and happiness and the good life that comes from it. I'm pretty sure you'll never regret it. Thanks.